Dark bleatings, everybody! Time for a little catch up on my Read What You Own challenge progress. I have now read 40 out of 100 books. If you're not familiar with Read What You Own challenge, it's in my case it's 100 books. I'm trying to read 100 books that I already own before I buy any more. It was easy at first, but I'm starting to get really twitchy, like I want to buy books because I really want to get some Sarah Langan books, and there's some stuff by George Daniel Lee as well that I want to get, and I can't stop thinking about them because I've put myself on a ban. So hopefully I'll get to the end of the challenge, you know, in the next few months. I'm much further along than I thought. I've said this in every video that I've done of the update so far. 40 books read this year so far. You know, when we're 3.5 months in is, wait, January, February, 2.5 months in. That's really fast for me to read. And I do consider myself a quick-ish reader, but this, even for me, this is a bit nuts. But I guess I just really want to get those new books. Anyway, here's a catch up on the 5 books that I have read since I last spoke to you. So the first one, I'm going to do this one first because I didn't like it very much and I feel really bad. And usually I don't talk about the books that I didn't like as much because I feel mean. But I said this in a recent video. I had a discussion with someone about book reviewing recently and realised that if I only ever talk about the books I really like, then it seems like I like everything, and then my opinions aren't very useful to people. So this is just to try and, I'm trying a little bit harder with my balance at the moment. So just because this book wasn't so much for me, it doesn't mean it won't be for you. And I'll explain, but it's, oh god, I feel so guilty, like, just because I started off saying I didn't like it very much. It's Soulless, Lonesome by Dan Shrader. So Soulless, Lonesome is about a guy who is very worried about his business finances and stuff because his business partner has just sort of like disappeared in the wind, just taken off. And this is also his brother-in-law. His sister was with this guy, so she's pretty pissed as well. And the guy just took off with no word, and his boat was found but he wasn't. And then so our main character, I'm so sorry, I can't remember the names of anyone from any of the books I'm about to tell you about, by the way. I'm awful for names. But so this guy's really concerned and he's just worried about everything. And then he gets a phone call from someone who is claiming that they can, you know, fix all of this. And all he has to be willing to do is be willing, say yes. And then there are sort of possibly some satanic coven things at work here, and that's usually the kind of story that I really enjoyed. But I didn't like rate this 1 or 2 stars. I did give this a 3 out of 5. I hate doing star ratings. I find them a bit like, everyone's scale is a bit different, so I don't think star ratings are super useful. But I gave this a 3 out of 5, and a 3 out of 5 to me is that I enjoyed the book, and you know, there was lots I liked in it, but I wouldn't read it again kind of ranking. So that's where I put it. I always enjoy sort of coven-y or culty aspects, especially if they're satanic. That's kind of like one of my favourite horror subgenres. My main gripe about the book, of why I didn't personally rank it higher, is because I just found it hard to believe the decision making of some characters. So I'm really a character obsessed reader, and so authenticity in how human characters are written within the worlds of their own stories is like a top tier priority to me. Ow. And just from the jump, so when the guy gets the phone call from the person saying they can sort of solve these issues for him, he's asked, you know, if he'd be willing to do anything, and he has to promise that he'd even kill to solve these problems, and he's kind of just immediately agrees to this. And I had a problem believing anyone would, because that's quite a big ask, and he doesn't ask how that would help or anything. And I just felt like the motivation for being willing to just agree to something so extreme, wasn't there? And I feel like it could have been avoided if perhaps he had a child that he had really high medical bills to pay for, or something like that. Something, you know, where someone he loves is on the line, and so it's like choosing between someone, his child, and anybody else. Like any parent would make that kind of decision in the right circumstances, probably. So I thought that that was just that was a bit off to me. And also, they're all like pissed that the business partner is gone. They've just assumed he's run off. But you'd think that if someone's boat that they left on was found but they weren't found, then the anger would turn to concern about their well-being, because I assumed immediately that the guy was dead, and I found it a bit hard to believe that the wife and business partner wouldn't also be concerned he was dead, rather than annoyed. So there was like just that kind of stuff over and over for me. I read other reviews where people really love this story. I'm very nitpicky about character stuff, so that's kind of why I didn't rank it higher. But if you're more of sort of like a plot driven reader, I think maybe you'd like this more than me. And it has all those dark elements. There's definitely scenes of horror, nice good old traditional horror. There's plenty of that. You know, the author doesn't shy away from going there in certain scenes. So yeah, it's a sort of like a fun kind of horror story outside of my gripes about it. Next, let's do Fearsome Creatures from Aliya Whiteley, or Whiteley, Aliya. Oh, I'm so sorry about my pronunciation. So this is number 22 in the Black Shuck Shadows collection. So these are micro horror short story collections, and they're always themed, and the author will pick the theme. So there'll be something that connects the story, or like an overarching topic or subgenre or something. And this is Fearsome Creatures, and I feel like the title implies it'll be all sort of like creature stories, but there's just a bit more to it than that. There's more subtext that we're working with. So let me just quickly go through. So there are in this book 5 stories, and then an afterword. So Day of the Dog. So this one did have killer animals. This was about a town that plugs in this sort of town-wide air freshener. So they're all kind of smelling lavender, I think is the smell. But unfortunately, the dogs in town have an adverse reaction to this. So this was just a really fun creature story. I gotta say creature, dog's story, man versus dog instead of dog as man's best friend in this case. And there's a little bit more to it than that, but I really enjoyed the imagery. It was potentially apocalyptic if everyone had these air fresheners, they plugged them all in the same time. That would be it for us. So I found that really fun. And then the next story, The Lovers That Lie Down in Fields, is about a couple that's in a wheat field, and seems like as good a place as any to ignite a little bit of romance, but there's possibly something sentient around them. And it had a romantic flair, but also there was something really grisly about it when you really think about it. So I really enjoyed that one. I love stories about locations that are behaving in ways they shouldn't. So I really enjoyed that one. I'm going to mispronounce this probably. Louisa Opines is the next story, and this is a really unique riff on Red Riding Hood. It's nothing like what you expect to see in a Red Riding Hood tale. How do I describe this one? So a girl lives with her aunt. She's never met her parents and she doesn't know who they are. Her aunt's never told her, but she's been living in this remote woodland cottage with her aunt forever. And one day a guy starts coming to the door asking survey questions, and she's just answering them, and she's thrilled to have somebody outside of her aunt to talk to, and you know, just sort of a connection to the outside world that she never visits. And so this becomes like a regular thing, where she's, I guess, trusting this guy a bit and answering all his questions. And then one day her aunt just doesn't come home, and so she goes out looking for her, and no matter where she goes, this survey guy always pops up and knows where she is and asks her more questions, and sometimes he hints at some information about her aunt, but he always needs her to answer yet another question. And then it goes really bizarre in a great sort of like fantasy horror way. And my main takeaway from this was metaphorical, allegorical, I'm not really sure the right word for what I'm trying to say here is, of how I feel like this is an internet age warning story about how freely people give their information and allow other people to collect information about them and how they use it. And it was just such a creative way to tell a story like that. So I really, really enjoyed that one. Then the next one is called Wrapped. And oh man, this made me so angry. This is about, I'm going to say it wrong, an Egyptologist. This is set a little back in the past. A female Egyptologist that finds this mask, and it was the mask of, oh, what's the lady's name? Kefatra, the mask of Kefatra, who was a woman in Egypt, and she spends quite some time translating what is carved on the inside of the mask, and at the same time that she's away, she discovers that she's pregnant as well. And then when she's on the return journey home, she news about this mask comes out, and she's very angry to find out that men have been credited with all the work that she's done, as would happen, especially in the time period, and her husband has like completely signed off on this, and she's starting to get angry, and she's questioning her, like in telegraph form, because they're not back together yet. And then he decides that she must be getting hysterical and needs a rest from the baby, and starts making medical decisions for her. And this gave me shades of the Yellow Wallpaper. It's the same type of story in that you know, if a woman is too outspoken, then her autonomy is going to be completely removed and men are going to decide everything. And it just made me really angry, because it would be great if this was just the stuff of horror fiction, but this is human history, and it's not even that far back. And in fact, depending on where you live in the world now, it's either a continuing problem or it's being brought back, this idea that women can't make all of their decisions, especially medical ones. So it made me really mad, but it was a great story, real thought-provoking and very emotionally evocative. And then the last story is a very modern monster. Oh, this one was really fun as well. So this is about a woman who reconnects with an uncle that she barely knows, and he takes her to camp on these moors where there's local legend of this creature, and she doesn't know if the creature's real or not. I won't like talk too much about that, but the ending was really good, and I just really liked the feel. This one was like a good old creature story, but with underlying subtext. So overall, I really recommend this. It was a really fun selection of stories, like totally different types of stories. I thought it was going to be all monsters, all creatures. Some of them quite obviously feature animals or creatures in the more like literal sense of the theme, and then others you have to dig down a little bit to find where the fearsome creatures are. But it's a really, really strong collection. I really enjoyed every single story in it, and definitely want to read more from this author, so I loved it. The next one, I loved this one as well, and I'm gonna mispronounce this, I'm on a roll today. It's Roth-Steyr. It's a gun. Roth-Steyr by Simon Bestwick, and I'm a fan of Simon's. I think Simon does really good unique twists on familiar tropes, and this was just so much fun. I guess this is a novella more than not a novel, it's a novella. It's about 130 pages. This is about a woman who works in a morgue, and she's really good with the living family members when she has to talk to them about their dead loved ones. And then her past starts turning up, and it turns out that this woman has a much longer past than most. She's been alive a long time, and I was really excited to find out why that was, because I usually assume vampire with stories like this. And we're going back and forth a little bit between her past and present. So in her present, she loves her job. She's with a really good woman, the love of her life, enjoy it, they live together in a nice home, everything is lovely. But then the past starts rearing its head, and so we start dipping into her past, which is wrought with violence, guilt and weirdness. And the climax of the story, like of her origin story, was so what in the Clive Barker on acid is this, in the best way. So I can't really say too much about it, but it's really, again, it's really emotionally engaging. The horror stuff is like I thought there was going to be a certain type of horror as I was reading it, and it went in a different direction to what I expected, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, I think I actually gave this 4 out of 5 stars, but I think it's a 5 out of 5 for me actually, now that I've had a few more days to think about it. So I really recommend that as well. It was really good. This one is not really horror, and it was from Pierce Publishing. It's Pennies from Heaven by James P. Blaylock. I actually have another book, so this is part of, I'm going to forget what the series is, but James P. Blaylock has a Gothic something, California Gothic series of books, and this is one of them. I have another that I really can't wait to read, and I do not read outside of the horror genre very much, as you probably know if you've watched the channel for any length of time, and so I don't know with how much authority I can talk about this, because I'm not even 100% sure that I know what category or genre this is in. I think it's like a small town mystery kind of thing. I'm not sure, but anyway, let me tell you about it. So our character, whose name, Jerry and Jane, married couple, moved to this new town, and they move into this house, and they're new to the area and everything, and there's an earthquake one night, and it dislodges some weird little artifacts in the basement that Jerry finds in like the loose dirt or whatever, and one of them is like a little coin thing, and he's wants to find out about the coin. So he talks to a lady who's like, I'm looking because I'm biding time trying to remember the lady's name. He's talking to a lady in town that's kind of like the local antiques expert, and she was a really fun character to read because she reminded me, she wasn't religiously crazy or anything, but she reminded me a bit of Mrs. Carmody from The Mist by Stephen King. And oh, Letty, that's her name. I didn't just find it on a page. So Jerry and Letty do not get on, and there's something off about Letty. She's kind of misleading him about this coin thing. She's got acquaintances, professional acquaintances that she's calling in weird favours from, and she gets very nosy about the house and Jerry's findings and things. And Jerry's trying to stay on the good side of her because his wife Jane needs funding for something that Letty's going to provide for some local projects. And so that's kind of like the basic story, is like the mystery of what Jerry has actually found and why Letty is so interested in it and everything, and then kind of what is Letty's deal, and it just like unfolds as we go on. And it was really very Moorish. Like, I was picking the book up and I didn't want to put it down, and it was a really fast, easy read, and there was something sort of cozy about it, but also it did feel like there was danger. It had a very mild spooky element, which I really liked as a horror fiction person, so I kind of I loved that it had that. But my favourite thing about it was Jerry and Letty's relationship, because Letty thinks quite a lot of herself, and she's judgmental about other people, and she's not afraid of confrontation, and she's quite abrasive. And Jerry is kind of sassy, and I really like that. So Letty seems to think that he's uneducated and he's somehow common, and that's her impression of him and how she treats him, and he picks up on that fast and allows her to think that of him, that he's not as intelligent as he is, or he doesn't think as much as he does or whatever, and he's like letting her think that her lowly impression of him is correct, because he's trying to get information from her. So I really loved all of their interactions, because this isn't a comedy or anything, but Jerry just really felt like a real person that would handle a woman like this, and all of the characters were really good. I really liked Jane as well, and I was just really invested, and I was surprised to enjoy a story like this so much, because I think I had this impression that these kinds of stories would be boring to me, because horror fanatic, but I was just delighted, and I had a really great time with it. So if you're looking for a bit of a change, something maybe a bit light, that is the thing about reading so much horror. I feel like horror reflects the social anxieties of the time, and we are in very tumultuous times, and a lot of the horror that I've been reading recently, the newer stuff, leaves me feeling a little bit dead and horrible inside, because the subject matter, I'm reading a lot of mental health related horror stories, things that involve real world politics and stuff, like the kind of stuff that freaks me out and makes me worried in my normal day-to-day life. And I feel like, as much as I am getting a lot out of my reading experiences, but I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed every now and then. So something like this, which felt very light by comparison, even though the stakes are high, and it just had a completely different feel and atmosphere. It felt like a really nice palate cleanser for me, like to reset me, put me back to not stressed when I start reading something new. So I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. And then the last book, speaking of stress, is a short story collection from Paula and Ashe. We Are Here to Hurt Each Other. And I felt very hurt by this book, and I think that was Paula's intention. So, oh man, I don't even want to go through the stories individually, because I'm going to depress myself all over again. So the first thing I should tell you before I elaborate is that this is a really good book, and I see why there's so much hype about it. I guess I would put this in the extreme category, but it's not needlessly bloody or violent or explicit or anything. There's no shock value for the sake of shock value here. I feel like this was really meaningful, and that the author did something really personal with all of the stories, and there are some really great horror images here, and there's some like really unique horror here. So I will talk through that a little bit. Okay, so the first story, Aspects of Emptiness, it's really short, it's more like a flash fiction, and it's about the idea that beneath the face we all wear is our real face, and that this one is just a mask, and you can only see the true face that you have in dark lighting or something like that, but that once you see it, you can't abide this fakeness anymore. And so that was a little brutal. And then the next story, Carry On, is, I think it's featuring the character from the first one or follow on, but this is about a woman gets kidnapped, and she's taken somewhere and tied to a chair, and there's a scary looking man. This guy on the cover here, as you can see, that's hideous, is torturing somebody else. And I don't want to say what happens in the first story, but I feel like it's a continuation of that. And so as a horror story goes, thematically it's very heavy with a lot of subtext and heavy stuff, but it was also a really great surface level horror as well. All the Hellish Cruelties of Heaven was next, and this one actually in the grand scheme of the book felt a little bit lighter to me. This is kind of a like recognizes like kind of story about a killer that is recognized by another killer, and it felt almost like a blooming friendship kind of story. I feel like it got heavier as it went on, and to be fair to Paula, there are explicit warnings in the beginning of the book, content warning, extreme graphic violence, child endangerment, child assault, child murder, sexual assault, incest and necrophilia. And I had that in mind every time I started a new story because I didn't know where a couple of those things were going to come in, and I'm very uncomfortable with a few of the... I don't have any particular triggers, but I'm very uncomfortable reading certain things. The incest story was... But yeah, I don't know how to feel about it. I think if you're somebody who enjoys extreme horror, but let me think now, because there are different types of extreme horror. Everyone lumps everything all together all the time. If you're somebody who enjoys Eric LaRocca's brand of extreme horror, this is probably for you. If you like Poppy Z. Bright, this is probably for you. If you're someone who enjoys the other side of extreme horror that's more like Duncan Ralston's Womb, lots of like explicit stuff in that book, but it feels a lot lighter. It won't leave you feeling depressed. Womb, so something like that. Or this is definitely the Poppy Z. Bright LaRocca brand of extreme horror. So yes, if that's your thing, I think you'd love this. I do think that this is a really great piece of horror fiction in its entirety, and I got something out of every story. It just made me really want to scrub my brain with Towley from South Park to feel okay again at the end. Subscribe, or else I'll curse you all. It's late at night when I'm recording this, and I think I've gone peculiar. What do you think? Hey, I hope there's been a book recommendation or two here for you. If you have read anything that has these kinds of feels, maybe a little bit more horror, I'd love to hear recommendations for that, because I really, really loved how not depressed I felt at the end of this one. Okay, see you next time, bleed!